As revealed in the stories that are told about the feuds and our reading of the Mountain Eagle, there were several companies and individuals who were willing to buy mineral rights from people. Also, the United States Land Syndicate was making up false deeds or just signing people's names to steal their tracts of land without their consent or knowledge. Today, we will cover one of the darkest periods of the entire late 1800s to early 1900s, and one that people either want to forget or completely gloss over: the fight to keep the land. We have been accused many times of giving a clean version of history where the coal mines were concerned. We feel that this is incorrect. We try our best to get both sides of the story with an honest, truthful lens from our magnifying glass. The Consol scandals were the flip side and running side by side with the positive stories that we have about the movers and shakers of Eastern Kentucky. We will always attempt to tell this story as compassionate, neutral observers to history. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. Please do not attempt to remove the safety bar while the ride is in motion. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up that time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces the YouTube algorithm that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. We already know this may be hard to hear. This is a very uncomfortable portion of Appalachian history that we are about to discuss. It is rarely spoken of, and usually those who bring it up are often threatened to this day. However, we feel it needs to be talked about and understood. While we cannot change history, we can learn from it so it never happens again. The current laws on the books have now somewhat protected homeowners, and one of the biggest ones passed in the late 1980s, called the Broad Form Deed Act. While the events we will discuss today are not really considered to be Consolidation Coal Company scandal, it still goes to the fact that there were many men who were acting in their name. There were greedy Appalachian men that saw dollar signs in the black coal that was underground and meant to get every penny that they could for it. Many families were uprooted and many men died trying to protect their land, and this story is to honor their memory and their fight to retain their heritage. Selling the land. Now, this was not an outright sale of the land. This was a purchase of the mineral rights. Often a land agent would come to a person's home and offer the family money for those rights. It would be explained to the family that seams of coal were deep underground and that the family would still retain their land holdings. The family would sell those rights to the minerals for pennies on the dollar. The thought was, that stupid company is wanting to buy rocks under my house that they cannot get to. Sure, you can buy that. The people of the Appalachian Mountains never realized that they would have to leave their land behind when the coal companies moved in. And, in a lot of cases, this was not taken very lightly. The Appalachian people are very attached to the land that they have. Many of the families that lived in the area since Daniel Boone and plan to die there several generations from now. However, a lot of families were not afforded that opportunity, and they were forced off the land that they loved. The trouble begins. Between the time of when Richard Brose sold his land holdings to John C.C. Mayo in January 1893, and Mayo sold 130,000 acres of his holdings to the Consolidation Coal Company in 1909, there was a time that Mayo was purchasing additional land rights. But there was a problem. By this time, people were reluctant to sell those land rights anymore because they had figured out what was going on. In Letcher County, there was a group of men who were harassing people into selling their land to John C.C. Mayo. By all reports, these people were calling themselves the Ku Klux Klan. The strange part of this is at that time, There was no people in Letcher County that would match the demographics that the KKK was famous for harassing. In either case, this group was still causing problems after Consol had started building Jenkins, Kentucky. This would lead Consol to deputizing John Wesley Badjon Wright as a U.S. Marshal, and in this position was put in charge of eliminating the KKK from Letcher County and the rest of eastern Kentucky. Alongside the trouble in Letcher County, there were men in Breathitt, Harlan, Perry, Knott, Floyd, Pike, and other counties that were doing the very same thing under different names. There were many court cases and criminal charges leveled against those that were behind the harassment. However, many of the men charged were never convicted or spent any time behind bars. The taking of the land. We often use the murders of Henry Vanover and Frank Sayers as our go-to when explaining what was happening with the deeds of the land. We will also lightly touch on the Cox, Markham, and Cockrell and Eversole murders to explain what happened to those who tried to warn people about this. In the case of Henry Vanover, he was given a huge plot of land for his service to the U.S. Armed Forces, and for many years he lived peacefully on his land. It was not until Richard Burroughs discovered King Coal on his land that the trouble began. Vanover was offered money for the land, but he refused this offer. There was an attempt upon his life before the second attempt was successful, leaving all of his land to his widow. The harassment did not stop at the death of Vanover. His widow faced hundreds of lawsuits for her land, and her daughter was almost beaten to death as a message, "Sell your land or else." The widow Vanover had enough and sold her land to John Wesley Badjon Wright and left the area with her remaining children. One of the most vocal residents and had the best case against the widow Vanover was Ira Mullins. His claim was due to his wife, Lorenza, being related to the Vanovers. He would get into a feud of sorts with Dr. Marshall Benton Taylor because Taylor dared to testify against him. Mullins would die a short time after the lawsuit went to court at the Pound Gap Massacre. Now, on to Frank Sayers. Sayers also had a plot of land that looked to be chock full of coal. He also had a real pretty wife and dressed in nice clothing from all accounts of him. However, he also refused to sell his land. It would not take long that Sayers was killed by members of the Thomas Talton Hall gang, and his wife, property, and clothing were taken by Hall himself. Hall did not keep this property long, as his misdeeds were discovered by Claibe Jones, and Hall was now on the run to keep out of jail. Hall would face a hangman's noose for the murder of a police chief in Norton, Virginia. In Perry County, there was Joseph Eversole. Eversole owned a store and was warning people not to sell their mineral rights for pennies on the dollar. This upset Benjamin Fulton French, who was a land agent of the county. The two sides soon came into conflict. This would eventually lead to the death of Joseph Eversole and his father-in-law, Judge Combs. The feud ran for many years after the death of Eversole, as many of the people that lived in Perry County was not willing to hand over the land for basically nothing. In Breathitt County, there were three men that stood in the way of progress: Dr. Cox, James Cockrell, and James Markham. All three men were killed because of warning people not to sell their mineral rights for pennies on the dollar. Because all three men were working together to make sure that the people who owned the land were treated fairly. It was on account of this that all three men were murdered on the streets of Jackson, Kentucky. The law. Now, we have searched for a long time to find information about a judge's ruling, or a law on the books, concerning this topic. It has been passed down from generation to generation that there was a ruling that the mineral rights took precedence over property land owners. Let me say, if a law or a ruling was passed down, I could not find it currently. If any of you know where it is, please let me know, and we will supplement this section of the series. Many an Appalachian person was displaced from their homes in the name of progress. Many left eastern Kentucky, but some remained to work in the mines and live in company housing to try their best to stay in the counties that they loved so very dearly. In a lot of cases, the property owners did not sign the agreements, and the properties were taken from them by nefarious characters of history. But as you can see, if you were a landowner, if you refused to sell your land, or worse yet, you tried to warn people of what was going on, you paid a very dear price indeed. Thank you. Kentucky Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching the video series on the scandals of the Consolidation Coal Company. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification button. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries in Appalachian history.